Good morning. Good morning. Welcome back to Thinking Critically, Living Biblically. We are on our second session together, and this is gonna be the first of two sessions where we talk about the Exodus story. This paradigm of Exodus is going to kind of carry us through this entire season together. So we're gonna start in the biblical story today rather than in any particular topic. Couple announcements first, as always. Please, if you have not had a chance to, go back to that joint forum with Reverend Jimmy Hawkins from the Office of Public Witness. That really lays the foundation for what we're going to be doing together in adult education this year. There is a Bible 101 class with Matt Skinner. This is Monday nights on Zoom starting October 6th. You can find a registration for that on Realm. Please sign up and join Matt for that class. It's okay to be doing that class and this class alongside. It's not like college where there's a prereq. This is a chance. If you're sitting around the table and I say, open to the book of Proverbs, and you have a panic moment because you don't know where the book of Proverbs is. Totally okay. Biblical knowledge is not the entry ticket to heaven, right? But we know it is something that sometimes people feel imposter syndrome around. It gets in the way of participation in adult learning events. We wanted to offer, based on some feedback, a real opportunity for people to dig in, explore the Bible, get a sense of what's in there, how to find things, how to read this book. So please sign up for that class with Matt Skinner. Registering on Realm is how you get the Zoom link. So please try to register on Realm for that class. And email Michael Gold if you run into any problems. Big thanks to the cleanup crew from yesterday. I know we had a good number of adult ed volunteers helping to clean the sanctuary. I heard about some flipping over and cleaning underneath pew cushions, some scraping of gum off the floor. I see Ronnie clapping. Let's give a round of applause to our building cleanup crew. I'm going to jump 2 announcements ahead here. Because that's part of the ways of how are we thinking about welcoming a new senior pastor into our midst? How are we getting the building ready? How are we getting ourselves ready? Another way to do this, a very easy way to do this, is to start wearing your name tag. I think some of this idea came out of the adult ed class because some of us would forget to take our name tags off when we went into worship, which was a very happy accident because it helped other people to greet us by name. And so the deacons are working on ways of making this a real place of welcome and thinking it will help Jessica to get to know our names if we've got name tags on. I know from personal experience, it takes a lot of repetition with the same person to really get to know everybody's name. So I see some people already wearing lanyards. That's awesome. We wanted to have name tags, not just, our practice has been to use disposable name tags, but why not, if we have them, keep ours and wear them again and again. So if you've got extra lanyards from old conferences lying around, you're welcome to bring them in and donate them. If you don't have any, you're welcome to go and grab them. There's a name tag making table out there, so you can grab one and make it for yourself, and just try to be in the habit. Keep it in your car, keep it in your purse, keep it in the pocket of your jacket, whatever it is, just to be able to wear a name tag to help to make this a space of welcome as Jessica joins us. And then finally, a reminder that there is a lecture at the U on St. Augustine. That'll be Tuesday, September 30th at noon, and that's at the Humphrey School. This is a chance to explore St. Augustine's African identity. We think of him as this theological founder of the church. We often forget that he is from North Africa, and so Professor Catherine Coney-Bear is going to be exploring that aspect of his identity. Larry Jacobs from the Humphrey School invited us to participate, specifically extended it to the Westminster Adult Ed program. He said, I think this is the kind of thing that would be right up your alley. So join us there. So I'm going to begin with a chance for you to do some individual thinking and reflecting and calling back. It's not going to be discussion just yet. It's going to be a quiet exercise. You'll see there's note cards and pens on your table. If it's daunting, if you feel like, everybody else is writing something down and I'm not, a great strategy is just to write the word watermelon over and over again. That's right. That's what extras do in a play. I think, is that right, Terry? Is that what they say to each other in the background? You've never heard that. Any word you want. But when I think about adult education, and especially thinking about the Bible in an adult education context, I have these two theories. Everyone's a little bit nervous that they don't know as much as everybody else, and everybody knows more than they think they do. And so we're going to start by just sort of generating among ourselves the answer to this question: what happens in the book of Exodus? Right? This is a book where Moses is a main character. If you need a hint, here's a hint of one of the things that happens in the book of Exodus. So take a minute or two and write down on your note card just anything you can think of that you think happens in the book of Exodus. So quietly at our tables for just a minute here. All right, there may be more in your minds than has made its way onto the note card, but that is okay. Now I'm going to do something that I should have thought to do beforehand, but I'm going to ask for a volunteer who thinks they've got something of a handle on the book of Exodus, on what happens in it, and the approximate order. You don't have to know exactly. So but I know we got some folks in here. We've got some retired clergy. We've got some religion professors. We've got some members of the Adult Ed Council. Let me tell you what your task is going to be, and then we'll see if anybody's willing to do this. And I've got a plan B too. So the task will be, I'm going to ask folks to name some of the things that they remember from Exodus, and the task will be to put those things on the board, kind of left to right in approximate order. We're going to try to get the events of the book approximately as they happen. You don't have to know which plague came first, right? But if maybe you know that there are plagues, and maybe you have a sense of where they happen in the story. So is there anybody who is willing to take that on? You will be lauded and applauded no matter the accuracy. If not, is there anybody willing to come up and be a writer, and we will help you know where it goes on the board? Anybody willing to do that? Okay, I thought the first hand I saw was Donna Floyd. Thank you. Donna, come on. The last time you volunteered, I had you reading Ezekiel 4:9. So you did get a prize. Unfortunately, there is no prize this time. The prize would be manna this time, and I don't have that kind of power. Yeah. Okay, so let's get, just raise your hand. We won't need to run the mic for this. I'll just repeat it back. Raise your hand. What happens in the book of Exodus? What are some events of the story? Yes, I see Mark in the back. Baby Moses in the bulrushes. So that's going to be towards the beginning. Yeah, baby Moses. Yeah, that way. It doesn't have to be exact. It can be a big mess. We're just going to try to get this story in our heads. Okay, we got baby Moses. Yes. The parting of the Red Sea. Where is that going to be relative to baby Moses? To the right of baby Moses. Yes, amazing. Yeah, it's not quite the middle, but it's like, yeah. Well, we'll see what else we get in there, because it depends on, there's going to be a lot of details about how to build a tent, and that's going to take up like the second half of the book, but I don't expect everybody to have all, the lampstands go here or whatever. I'm giving away too many hints. Yes, Bill. The plagues. Okay, where do the plagues go between baby Moses? I just said it. They go between baby Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. Yeah. Okay, I saw Terry. Moses kills a man. Yeah, where does that happen? Before the plagues. Yeah, before the plagues. This is great. Okay, other remembrance. The burning bush. Yeah, where's the burning bush? I heard between the murders and the plagues, and yes, that's right. Now I'm realizing that this activity may test my knowledge of the order of events in the book of Exodus. We have a couple of chairs here, and I see thank you to Adult Ed Council members helping with more chairs. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. We put Red Sea. We can always have two lines if we need to, if we get into real detail about the tabernacle. Yeah, I see Pam in the back. Passover, yes. Where is Passover? End of the plagues, yeah. So that's going to be between the plagues and the Red Sea. Okay, what else? Yes, Marg.
Official in Pharaoh's court.
Official in Pharaoh's court. Say more about.
Well, he grew up in Pharaoh's court.
Yes. Okay, so maybe that's between baby Moses and Moses murdering a man, because that's when he flees. That's right. Okay, other events we remember from the Exodus story. Golden calf. Yeah, where is that? After, yeah, yeah. I think putting it over there is great. That's almost about the halfway. Assuming we're going down to another line. 10 Commandments. Where is that relative to golden calf? Yeah, that's right. Donna's got it. Okay, yes. Doris. Pharaoh's army drowns. Yeah, that's sort of part of that same event. Yep. Right next to it. It's parts and then it contracts, it reconnects in a very unfortunate way for the Egyptians. Yes, Marg.
Miriam dances.
Miriam dances. Where is that?
It's after the Red Sea.
Yeah, she sings a lusty song after that, this celebrating the victory. And in a previous adult ed class that I taught in a previous congregation, I had people sing that song on their own. But it was, what is that experience like of singing this victory song? But it's also a song that celebrates the destruction of human life. You know, how does that feel to do that? And so I'm not going to make you guys do that because we don't really do homework in this class. But if we did, that would be homework. Yes, Mark, go ahead. Oh, okay. Where would you put that? Before the Red Sea. So going out for a religious ceremony. Yeah. This is Moses tells Pharaoh they're going out for a religious ceremony. Yeah. Does that happen before the plagues? I'm not familiar with this part of the story. Before or after let's just put it up top. Moses deceives Pharaoh. Let's put it there. Other events of Exodus. Yes, Paul. Moses strikes a rock and water comes out. Yes. So where is that? That's somewhere in the wilderness wanderings. I forget whether that's before or after the 10 Commandments. Before, after. Okay, I think this is before the 10 Commandments, but he does it again in Numbers, right? And isn't that what gets him in trouble? But we won't put Numbers up there but I'm pretty sure that's around like the same time as, and we can add this to the manna from heaven, which I think is.
So where is the wilderness, the manna, and
Yeah.
does that fall after Miriam dances, but before the 10 Commandments?
There's going to be a lot of wilderness. There's going to be wilderness before and after. So let's just put wilderness in there. We got golden calf up there. Yeah. He changes the staff into the snake. Yeah, so that's back, and there was something about the hand getting withered, right? Doesn't he cover his hand and then it comes out withered? Maybe this is Pharaoh's hand. I forget. But there's some events that sort of Moses as a sort of quasi sorcerer figure, and that's back when he's negotiating with Pharaoh in the court in this sort of going towards liberation. Okay, what else? Yes.
Maybe I'm assuming that this is already written or assumed, but speaking to God for the first time.
Speaking to God. Yeah. And hearing God. Where does that happen? That's the burning bush. Yeah. So we've got the burning bush there, but that voice of God coming from in there. And God saying, I have heard the cry of my people, right? God saying, I am aware of the people's suffering and their oppression. Yes, Betty. So the 10 Commandments are another mountaintop moment with God. The burning bush is one. It's this sort of early moment. And then the 10 Commandments happen a little bit later on when the whole people have come out. So that's a really important distinction because we've got this personal revelation to Moses, the leader, but it becomes this revelation to the whole people, right? So not just I'm here to liberate, but here is how you live your life together. Yeah, Bill, go ahead. The second copy, when does that happen? That's after the golden calf, yeah, because I think, doesn't Moses cast down and break that first copy? He and God are both pretty upset about the golden calf. Yeah, yep. Yes. The midwives, yeah.
Refused to kill the firstborn son of the Hebrews, and they were complicit in getting Moses into the rush basket and the princess and the whole thing.
Yeah, yep. Midwives can go even before Moses. Yeah, they make this whole thing possible, right? This story would not unfold without the Hebrew midwives. Absolutely. Yes, Jim.
You want to forget Canada, the pillar of
Canada. Oh, I see. Canada as God. That's an interesting theological reading. We were thinking critically, living biblically. Yes, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. So where is that going to be? It's in the wilderness. It's part of the wilderness. And that also tracks throughout the wilderness part of the book of Exodus. Yeah, I see Dwayne in the back. Yes, the revelation of the divine name. They use it to make the golden calf. Yeah, yep. So there's a theft of gold that happens as they're leaving Egypt, and then they use it to make the golden calf in the wilderness. And then we also have God's name revealed. So maybe just after plagues, before Passover, or maybe, yeah, somewhere in there. I forget where that happens relative to the doorposts, but right around that time we could say theft of gold. Theft is a big word because these are people who have not been compensated for their labor for their entire lives. But yes, Jim. Aaron, yes. Where would we have Aaron in the story? We'd have him at the very end. We'd have him at the very beginning. Yeah, Aaron is sidekick. Where's Aaron in the golden calf? So Aaron's actually making the golden calf. Moses is at the top of the mountain. Aaron's down there. Everybody's upset that Moses has been on the top of the mountain for so long. And they say, we got to solve this problem ourselves, right? God and Moses seem to have abandoned us. They're in this, sort of long 40-day session up there on the mountain, and we need help now. Let's make a golden calf. Aaron obliges, and he's the one to sort of organize that. Yeah, Bill.
God shows God's self to Moses. He puts him in a rock, puts his hand over him, and he says, "You can see my back."
Yes, that is an amazing story. That may be in Numbers. Does anybody know the story of God passing by and Moses, he can't see God's face but can only see God's back? That happens during this wilderness period. I'm just not sure whether it's in Exodus or Numbers. There's this whole thing about God's glory being so powerful that looking upon God's glory is almost a dangerous thing. His face is radiant. Yes. Yeah, yep, exactly. So Moses, when he goes up the mountain, his face shines from talking to God. When he comes down, it's like so bright and shiny that he has to put a veil over his face between himself and the people. The sense is that there is something powerful and holy in the people's midst, this sort of force from outside, this divine presence with them. Okay, I'm going to, yes, Jim. Jericho's going to be after this. Jericho's going to be in, is it Joshua or Judges? Does anybody remember? Joshua? Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. This is a very valid way to carry biblical knowledge in the songs of your childhood, right? And so, like, if you have to work things out that way, awesome. That's biblical education at working as it should. Yes, Tim. Yes, the battle with the Amalekites, that is an important one. I don't know where that goes. Do you know where that battle is? Okay, at some point there's a battle with the Amalekites. Weirdly, I heard somebody on the radio talking about the battle with the Amalekites recently. Like, speaking of this sort of thinking critically, living biblically mode, these tropes are showing up in our modern discourse in thinking how militaristic is religion to be, right? What is so that'll show up later. I forget whether that's in Exodus or not. That's in Joshua. Joshua's holding up his staff. I thought that there was a Moses up and down too, but come and help him hold his arms up. Yeah. Does he do that at the Red Sea too? Is there help holding his arms up at the Red Sea, or does he do that all on his own? Extending the rod and coming back. Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I don't know where that goes. The one thing I would like to add to this is the instructions for and construction of the tabernacle. So that can go sort of way to the right. That can go sort of towards the very end, although it takes up almost the second half of the book. And it's just repeated instructions for how to build the tabernacle, which is this traveling structure for God to dwell with the people. There's instructions for the furniture, the lampstands. There's instructions for the priests, who can enter, how do they need to be ordained, what should they be wearing, how do they need to cleanse themselves. The sense of how do we carry this? How do we, and they build, that's where the Ark of the Covenant comes from, if you've heard of that from the Indiana Jones movie. That's where that gets built. The Ark will show up later in the biblical story. But this way of mediating God's presence, or sort of managing the holiness that is going to be in the people's midst. Yeah, Jackie.
Fun fact about that, their actual dimensions are mentioned for the size of the tabernacle, and that was used in the Middle Ages to support the flat earth theory, because there's another Bible verse that says the earth is like the tabernacle.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we're getting a little bit of sort of history of science here from Jackie, which is, or maybe history of pseudoscience, I don't know. So the tabernacle, with the dimensions were given, it was named as flat, and there's another verse that says the earth is as the tabernacle, and so it's thought, well, tabernacle flat, therefore earth flat. It was a support for the flat earth theory. Interesting. Okay, so I hope this exercise sort of helps us get the arc of this story before us. And as you can tell, we don't necessarily know everything in every detail in exact order, and that's okay. We can go back, we can look things up, we can keep learning. Thank you, Donna, for this. That is... Okay. So we're going to be sitting with this story and thinking about this story in terms of two main moves that happen in the Exodus story. The first, and this is going to be the last of my Charlton Heston. He's not going to be featured in the rest of this PowerPoint. But the first move, right, we think of as liberation, as the parting of the Red Sea, God hearing the cries of God's people in Egypt and delivering them from enslavement, from suffering, from oppression. So there's this strong liberation move that happens in the start of Exodus. And then there's a second move, which is covenant, which is, and Betty, your comment actually really brought this to the fore of these sort of two moments of revelation. There's I've heard the cry of my people, and then there's, here are commandments. This is going to be my covenant with you. This is how you live together in freedom. And we'll see as the book of Exodus unfolds, we already see it some with the golden calf incident, right? This is going to be really hard to do. Matt quoted a professor of his saying that the first part of the book of Exodus is God getting the Israelites out of Egypt. And the second part is God getting Egypt out of the Israelites, right? That there's this propensity to recreate systems of power and domination. And this is a trend that we're going to be looking at today as we look at how is this story used, mostly in an American context. We'll look at a couple of international examples, but how does this story kind of play out and unfold? Yeah, Betty.
I just have a comment because using Charlton Heston makes me think of him holding up his rifle, saying, "From my cold dead hands." Yeah. Somehow is so incongruous with today.
Sure, yes. So that there's this iconic image of Charlton Heston holding up his rifle from my cold dead hands. Yeah, Charlton Heston holding up the staff, right? This shows the extent to which we can map onto this story what we want to see in it. If he can be this sort of icon of a Moses figure, what does that say about the kind of imaginative stretching that's required to appropriate this story in some of the ways that we do? So I apologize for the sort of violence of this image, and he will not appear again in this PowerPoint. So before we get into American examples of this, I want to think about I want to sort of stay in the Bible a little bit and think about how the Exodus story functions within Scripture itself. So even before we get to later examples of people appropriating the Exodus story or using the Exodus story as a template for their own experience, how does Exodus function within the Bible? So this comes from Exodus 12. This sort of comes from the period where they are getting ready to depart from Egypt and leaving Egypt. This is firmly in that sort of liberation context. And as the people are preparing, God says to them, "This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses." For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day shall be cut off from Israel. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread. For on this very day I brought your companions out of this land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout your generations as a perpetual ordinance. So what is this celebration? What is this remembrance in the Jewish tradition? This is Passover, right? So we see the unleavened bread, matzah, on the Passover table. Technically, there's 2 festivals sort of outlined here at this point in Exodus. There's the Passover, and then there's the unleavened bread. The text part is the unleavened bread. The picture is the Passover. Those have often been sort of collapsed together, and they're really observed one after the other. Passover is the Seder. The unleavened bread is those days that follow of eating the matzah. So these are 2 biblical ordinances. But the thing that I really wanted to point out here is that we are right in the middle of a dramatic escape. The people have not fled Egypt yet. The people have not arrived in the promised land yet. They're right in the middle of getting out of Egypt. Things are dangerous. Things are bloody. And God is saying, here's how you're to remember this, right? Which feels a little off. You'd sort of want to get through the trauma and then maybe talk about how to process it and observe it and remember it. But built into the Exodus story is the remembrance itself. And that has something to do with the way that the book of Exodus is written and the timing of the writing of the book of Exodus. So you might remember this from 2 years ago. This was the timeline that Michael Gold and Matt Skinner made together. And it indicates a difference between the timing of the events that the book of Exodus describes. And scholars are not entirely sure about the sort of historicity of this. Some people want to say, yep, this historically happened. Other people say, we don't have a ton of evidence of this, but this is, around the sort of 1200 BCE is when the events of the Exodus story would have taken place. But the writing of the book of Exodus doesn't take place until about 600 years later. So that is a long gap of time. We are not getting an eyewitness account of the Exodus story. We are getting a story that has been transmitted in the community, that is being understood in the context of the present events of the community. And so if we think of this, and again, like much of the dating of these biblical books is approximate. We don't know these things in most cases for sure. But if we think of what's happening, around that year 600, and this timeline you might remember from 2 years ago as well, that it just got more and more complicated as the season went on. But it's happening between the fall of Israel to the Assyrians and the fall of Judah to the Babylonians. So it's being recorded and remembered by a community that's having present day experiences of exploitation, of conquest. So there is very much an understanding of present day realities in light of this remembered communal story of the Exodus from Egypt. The point I'm trying to make is that this act of interpreting Exodus is happening the entire time. We don't have some pure original version of the Exodus story that everybody else is working from. We have a version that is in the hands of a living community seeking to understand its own experience. I just want to pause here. Does that make sense, this sort of historical gap that's even built into these stories? Okay, because I want to sort of give us permission to do this kind of mapping on, right? To do this kind of understanding our own lives and our own situation in light of these biblical stories, even as we also talk about the dangers of doing that. So let's look at some other examples of this. Safwat Marzouk, who is one of the people that we interviewed 2 years ago as our scholar to talk about the book of Exodus, he's got a book about the ways that Egypt shows up as a monster in the book of Ezekiel. Now, in the book of Ezekiel, does anybody remember what empire the people of Judah are dealing with in that book? Does anybody remember sort of who comes and conquers Judah and takes the people into captivity? The Babylonians. Yeah, the Babylonians, right. So in the book of Ezekiel, Egypt shows up as a monster. This is I'm not going to say this word out loud. This is an illustration that comes from the book of Revelation from Martin Luther's Bible. In the book of Revelation, there is the beast, and then there's the woman riding on top of the beast. Does anybody remember, we see the word Babylon there. So here, this one comes from the book of Revelation. So describing events of about 600 years after the Babylonian captivity. It's a New Testament book. So Babylon is the bad guy here. What's the empire that's sort of underneath all this? What does Babylon represent? Rome. Yeah, I heard somebody say Rome. So here we have, Egypt representing Babylon, Babylon representing Rome. What's this a picture of? Last Supper, right? So this is Jesus and his disciples, and what feast are they celebrating? Passover. So again, we're in a Roman context, but what's happening in this Roman context is a meal that celebrates liberation from Egypt. And if we think about Jesus' last week in the temple and his interactions with Jewish religious authorities and then ultimately Roman authorities, there's this sense that Jesus is doing something powerful and dangerous that is what leads to his execution, or is given as an excuse for his execution. And Jerusalem at that moment is a powder keg because it's the Passover festival, because everybody's gathering to remember this celebration of liberation. And in the back of everyone's mind is the Roman Empire. So there's this mapping of the Exodus story onto the present moment in Jerusalem. So even within Scripture, we see this happening. This is a picture of Safwat from our conversation with him 2 years ago. So in the Protestant context, now we're going fast forward, 1,500 years or so. This is the Geneva Bible. This is an early Protestant Bible. What do we see in this picture that's sort of the frontispiece of the Geneva Bible? This is an eye test portion. It's the Red Sea, yeah. We see the Red Sea, we see the Israelites, we see the Egyptians. What's that up there? The pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud. We see chariots and horses and riders, maybe the Egyptians. So this is being highlighted in the Geneva Bible, and there's a way in which this story is now being mapped onto the experience of persecution of Protestants in their as they come to understand themselves, mapping themselves onto the experience of the Israelites. I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, now we're going to talk about how this gets to the United States. So who's this guy? We talked about him last week. John Winthrop, yeah. So John Winthrop, sort of Puritan lawyer, leader of a group of colonists coming to, and I like how I just stole this slide from Matt. The New World is in air quotes there, right? It's not something they discovered. It already existed with plenty of people there. We will get there in this class. And he was frequently the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I'm going to quote again from the same sermon that Matt quoted from last week. This is the sermon on the Arabella, and we think it was on the Arabella, either on the Arabella or somewhere shortly before or after. And he's quoting from the book of Deuteronomy, which is a sort of extension of the Exodus story and a retelling in some ways of the law. And he's talking about Moses saying, "There is now set before us life and good, death and evil." And the exhortation here is to choose life. And if we choose life, that the Lord our God may bless us in the land whither we go to possess it. But if our hearts shall turn away so that we don't obey, we shall surely perish. So this sort of mapping onto the story of Moses and the Exodus, this is our departure into a new promised land. What are some other themes that you see kind of emerging in these words of Winthrop? False gods. Yeah, there's a sense of of idolatry. Maybe this is a golden calf illusion. Yeah, I'll go back to the previous one. Yes. So this is a sort of foreshadowing of next week when we'll talk about covenant more. So I hate to say it, we might see Winthrop again next week because he's talking about covenant. This is a period when we'll be talking about covenant theology, when people sort of interested in setting up new communities, we're looking at biblical covenant as a model. We also see a little foreshadowing of something Matt will talk about later with going to the land to possess it, right? So it's not just where are the Israelites coming from, it's where are they going to. And that becomes a very dangerous part of adopting this Exodus story is what happens after and what do we feel authorized to do to the inhabitants of the lands where we're going. So a lot of these themes show up here already in this sermon. We see it happening again. This is a Congregationalist minister preaching sort of in the time of the Revolutionary War. And he's got, I'm just going to give his sermon title. I wish I could get away with sermon titles this long, but I think the communications department would not like it. So he's saying the American states acting over the part of the children of Israel in the wilderness, and thereby impeding their entrance into Canaan's rest, or the human heart discovering itself under trials, which I just think is a great sermon title there. Again, you can see him mapping the American experience onto the experience of Israel and locating it in that wilderness time. So again, like Winthrop, he's kind of saying that, you know, we have a choice here, that our behavior will in some ways affect how God responds to us, right? That we need to be acting in ways that are faithful to God, and that will sort of determine how well this experiment goes. And note, this theme has carried forward. This is 150 years later than John Winthrop on the Arabella. This is an early draft of the seal of the United States. Does anybody know who drew this? This is Ben Franklin. This is his version of the seal. What do you notice in this one? Pillar of fire. Yeah, again, pillar of fire. It looks like the Egyptians in the sea. What does it say on the outside? Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I heard an amen. We might wish that this was our seal in the present day, right? This is again sort of in the project of building the American Constitution. Building. This was before the Constitution, but this is 1776 in the project of the Revolution. How do we think about American political identity as being anti-tyrant? And I heard some people doing the theological work of mapping this into our own present day experience. And so this, Jefferson also had a draft of a seal with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, sort of a sense of divine guidance. The final design was an eagle with the eagle on the back of the quarter with the arrows in its hands. And that's a classical symbol of ancient republics, so that's more of a secular example. But the eagle is also referenced in the book of Exodus, in Exodus 19, so right around the time of moving from the sort of departure from Egypt into the Ten Commandments. There's God says, I bore you up on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So that's also a biblical reference kind of built into the seal that we ended up with. Let's see. So I want to look a little bit at some of the shift that's happening in the sort of white American understanding of the Exodus story, because here we have Ezra Stiles. Any Yaleys in here? Yes, Nan, Rocky. We have an Ezra Stiles College at Yale, and this is a note from Matt. He was also one of the founders of Brown University, Congregationalist minister in 18th century United States, or 18th century America, becoming the United States. And he's talking about this Exodus story too. He calls this republic God's American Israel. And here he's talking about he says he's being elusively prophetic of the future prosperity and splendor of the United States, and that God still has greater blessings in store for us. So we're seeing a sort of stripping away of some of what Winthrop had brought in, which was to say, like, God's design for America also kind of depends on us living up to our side of the bargain here, right? In styles, we're seeing more of just God loves and blesses America, less of a sense of sort of what do we need to do to live up to that blessing. So we're seeing this America as a chosen people without thinking about, okay, what are the obligations that God has for a chosen people? Because as we see, like, no sooner are they liberated than they're given a set of laws. And that sort of dropped out here. So a lot of this story, as I've been telling it, comes out of the work of this scholar, Albert Rabateau. He was a professor at Princeton of African and African American religious history. And he sort of identifies and traces this theme in the way that it's being used by white Americans, and then turns and asks a question about how is this same story being used by black people in the United States, saying, is America Israel or is she Egypt? Right? So we have this real interpretation of this story as belonging to the sort of the project of the sort of population and sort of founding of this country by white colonists coming over from Europe. But then there's also the experience of black people being brought here involuntarily for either indentured and then eventually enslaved servitude. And the 1619 Project, I don't know if anybody was involved with that when it came out a couple of years ago, but saying we can date this back to the year before the Pilgrims got here, right? That this is from the beginning a part of our history in this country. So Frederick Douglass is pointing this out in the context of spirituals, right? He's identifying the ways in which black people are using these stories, which enslaved people are using these stories to say, we identify ourselves with the Israelites who are caught in an oppressive empire. He notes, a lyric like, "O Canaan, sweet Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan." This is not just about going to the promised land as heaven, but this is the promised land as the north, the promised land as escape. There's a mapping of the Exodus story onto the geography of the United States as a way of saying, God is on the side of the enslaved, and let my people go is a very clear message, right, of oppression, slavery is wrong. That's a core theme in the Older Testament. And enslaved people were very quick to latch onto that and say, hey, there is a real mismatch between what we are hearing from the preachers employed by the enslavers and what we hear in these stories. So the Exodus story becomes a powerful template. Harriet Tubman is seen as the Black Moses. She is seen as a Moses figure because she is literally leading people out of captivity and into freedom. And spirituals, go down Moses, wade in the water, Mary, don't you weep, the Pharaoh's army got drowned, right? Like there's all of these songs are coded messages about what is the fate of those who oppress, how to find our way to freedom. The wade in the water song, God's going to trouble the water. Troubled waters are easier to flee in, harder for the dogs to follow. Go down Moses, let my people go, right? So these songs carry the theology of liberation for enslaved people in this country. So as basically as soon as sort of America as a project begins, it's getting read both ways, as Israel and as Egypt. This comes from, this is David Walker writing an appeal to the colored citizens of the world. And he's, again, comparing the Hebrews to Exodus. We see a black Moses. We see the commandments on the mountaintop here. And then we can carry this forward into the 20th century and think about the civil rights movement. Dr. King's sermons were full of Exodus imagery. This is Taylor Branch's 3-part biography of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Parting the Waters, right? We've got that up there. Pillar of Fire and At Canaan's Edge. At Canaan's Edge is going to happen later. That's going to happen at Deuteronomy. But this is, again, a mapping of the Exodus story onto the experience of the civil rights movement. And this is a picture by Carl Dixon that really illustrates this. He's got, on that side of the picture, we have Moses and the Red Sea. On this side of the picture, we have Harriet Tubman and the river and the forest. He's got Barack Obama and Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. are the figures there that are arranged in sort of like almost like a Mount Rushmore fashion of who are the leaders who have carried this project forward. So this is his, and he's also got a figure of Christ emerging on Easter Sunday. I wanted to bring this this image in particular just to say, we're talking a lot about the Exodus story as a template here. If we think about the Newer Testament, we can also map these two moves onto the Newer Testament. There's also this understanding of liberation as justification, right? Liberation from sin, liberation from death, liberation from the things that bind and trap us, and then moving towards sanctification. What is our positive responsibility? How do we live this out? But we're really sort of focusing on the Exodus story because that maps very well onto these social and political movements. Moving forward, we got James Cone. He was a professor at Union Seminary in New York and really a founding figure in Black liberation theology. He's saying that in the Exodus story, God reveals that God is the God of the oppressed, involved with their history, liberating them from human bondage. I have heard the cry of my people in Egypt, right? Cone is saying, this is who God is. This is the character of God, full stop. He says, Christian theology must become Black theology, a theology that is unreservedly identified with the goals of the oppressed community and seeking to interpret the divine character of their struggle for liberation. Cone is saying, this is theology. This is who God is. And so he's really taking a lot of this impulse that had been building in Black theology and sort of bringing it into an academic context, naming it as Black theology and saying this is just what theology should be. This is who God is and the character of God. There were some critiques of Cone. This is Dolores Williams, who was also a professor at Union. She has a book, Sisters in the Wilderness, The Challenge of Womanist God Talk. And what Williams introduces is this question of what happens when that oppressed community ticks over and begins building a society of its own. And she says, if Black liberation theology wants to include Black women and speak in behalf of the most oppressed Black people today, the poor, homeless, jobless, economically enslaved women, men, and children sleeping on America's streets, in bus stations, parks, and alleys, theologians must ask themselves some questions. Have they, in the use of the Bible, identified so thoroughly with the theme of Israel's election that they have not seen the oppressed of the oppressed in Scripture? And so William, she's pulling out this question of what are the ways that hurt people can hurt people? Have they identified so completely with Israel's liberation that they've been blind to the awful realities of victims making victims in the Bible? Does this kind of blindness, and again, I wish you would pick a different metaphor here, with regard to non-Hebrew victims in the Scripture, also make it easy for Black male theologians and biblical scholars to ignore the figures in the Bible whose experience is analogous to those of Black women? So she's asking these questions about intersectional identities and how these map onto one another, and asking this question of what does it mean when people who have experienced oppression will also carry that out. And we can map this question onto John Winthrop, right, and say these early colonists who were fleeing from oppression in Europe, who were fleeing from religious persecution, come and then carry out a kind of persecution on the people that they find here, and also on the people who are brought against their will. So this is a theme that plays out all over. She's suggesting another metaphor here, which is the metaphor of Hagar in the wilderness. So Hagar is a figure from the book of Genesis. She is an enslaved person held by Abraham, right? Who we think of as this, he is the original recipient of the covenant. Hagar is a servant in his house, and Sarah suggests that Hagar should be the one to bear a child when she herself is not able to. And then after Sarah gives birth to Isaac, casts Hagar out. What's Hagar's son's name? Ishmael. Yep. So Isaac and Ishmael are the two sons of Abraham. And she says, what can we learn about Hagar and her experience? How can we use that as a template for our theology? Are there ways that that's more life-giving, more liberating than to stick with the Exodus story? Because as we're going to see, there's going to be some real challenges with the Exodus story. Okay, I'm gonna, this is so hard because there's so many things to talk about. 2 other quick examples. We're gonna see the Exodus story used in economic terms to talk about the labor movement, right? There's a way in which labor understood itself as wage slavery, as another thing from which people needed liberation. Of course, the labor movement has its own racist implications. It's going to be very hard to find true heroes anywhere here, but the labor movement is, let's see, I'm not going to stay here just as there's too many things to see. Sorry, I got overzealous in my making of the slides because I also really want to, so the labor movement is using this, so is liberation theology, which arises out of Latin America in the 1960s and 70s. Gustavo Gutierrez, a Peruvian priest, writes a book called A Theology of Liberation and introduces this idea of the preferential option for the poor, very much in this same mode of God is a liberating God. Okay, I feel breathless. I want to give you a little more discussion time as we end here. This is for table discussion, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the class and step out. I've got to go upstairs to lead worship, but as we're closing today, I'm going to leave this with you as discussion for about 5 minutes around your own tables. So what are opportunities and dangers of mapping our own story onto the biblical story? And where do you see this happening today? So that's table talk. Any questions for me before we break up into tables for that? Okay. All right. Have at it. It is a joy to be together. Yeah.